Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's event, Making Transport Work in Cities and Large Towns After the Pandemic, with a special focus on the East Midlands region. The event has been kindly supported by Midlands Connect. We've got a great panel to discuss and explore some of these issues, and I'll introduce them in a moment, but let just let me give a bit of housekeeping. As always, the event is being recorded and will be made available on our website after the event. During the event, your microphones will be kept on mute. If you want to tweet about the event, the hashtag is CFC Urban Transport. There will be opportunities for questions to the speakers once they've said their things in a moment. You can submit your questions at any time. You don't have to wait until they've all finished. And you do that by sending your question via the chat function to ask a question. When we get to questions, if there's time, we like you to ask your question. So be prepared for that. But if you prefer me to read it out when you submit it, just let me know and we'll go down that route, and we'll all be done by 12 o'clock. So let's get going. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to pass the mic to Maria Macancozes, who is the Chief Executive of Midlands Connect, to say a few words. Maria, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Centre for Cities event today, talking mainly about not only how you make transport work in big cities, but also in large towns. It's a new area of work that I'm particularly very fond of. As you know, Midlands Connect researches, develops and recommends strategic transport projects which will provide the biggest possible economic and social benefits for the Midlands. You know, as cities and towns across the globe start to reopen after the pandemic, they're no doubt going to face urgent challenges around how to maintain public health while safely and smartly scaling up the use of public transport and revitalize our high streets. Alongside these pandemic-related challenges, they must also grapple with long-standing issues of inequity, aging infrastructure, lack of basic services, and threats posed by a changing climate, all of which actually are pretty much embedded into government's both Build Back Greener and the levelling up agendas. To reflect all these huge changes we are all experiencing, including Brexit, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the heightening climate crisis, Midlands Connect is actually in the process of refreshing our strategy to ensure we overcome all these challenges. This is why it's so important for us to be here today, to be working with the Centre for Cities and indeed our panelists on such crucial agenda. You know, so thank you to you, Andrew, David, Verna, and Bridget, and indeed for all of us joining, all the participants joining today, for joining us in such a crucial debate. So thank you again, Andrew, and over to you.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Maria. Great context and framing for, I'm sure, some of the conversations and discussion we're going to have today. Okay, let me introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is David Astill, who is the Managing Director of Nottingham City Transport. Following David will be Verna Bayliss, who's the Director of Planning, Transport and Engineering at Derby City Council. After Verna will be Andrew Smith, Director of Planning, Transportation and Economic Development at Leicester City Council. And our last speaker is Bridget Rosewell, who amongst many other things is a commissioner at the National Infrastructure Commission. So those are our panelists. They will share their thoughts and then we'll get into a conversation. So have your questions at the ready, fire them in, and we'll get through as many as we can once we've gone through and listened to our speakers. So David, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak this morning. I guess one of the reasons that I am speaking to you this morning is to give you a perspective on the bus operator's point of view of how we're going to recover from our current difficulties. Up to March last year, of course, I guess most of you will know, Nottingham could boast one of the most successful local public transport networks outside of London. Patronage across Greater Nottingham was in the order of 80 million passenger journeys a year. 50 million of those, of course, were made on Nottingham City Transport's buses. And Nottingham's bus users were amongst the most satisfied in the country. The annual Transport Focus surveys highlighted this. consistently achieving satisfaction scores of 92% or better, figures that made other areas of the country, if we're honest, look a bit like a sick patient, and with the envy of many areas, including London. So Nottingham City Transport, as England's largest remaining municipal bus operator, had been crowned UK Bus Operator of the Year a record-breaking 5 times. And Trent Barton, Nottingham's other significant player, the independent operator providing interurban services to and from the city, is also recognised nationally as a leader in customer service. So perhaps it's no surprise that Nottingham could boast the highest bus use per head of population outside of London and Brighton, at nearly 3 times the national average number of bus trips. But of course, since March last year, we've had a crisis, and we've seen bus use in Nottingham collapse to as little as 13% of pre-COVID levels. Although I'm pleased to report we are seeing something of a recovery and have seen patronage return to as much as 2/3 of where we were. But clearly, there's still a long way to go. Important questions. Will people return to the office? Will students return to the lecture hall? In the case of Nottingham, our city centre is also at a crossroads. We've witnessed firsthand the collapse of the ambitious plans to redevelop the Broadmarsh shopping centre. Other major retailers have gone bust in the city too, as retail has moved online. A big question then, will Nottingham still have a city centre that people have reason to visit on a regular basis? And importantly, will it be a city centre that people want to visit? Now that's a crucial question to the future prosperity and success of Nottingham's public transport offer, because for those of you familiar with Nottingham, will know that it's set out geographically in a way that aids your classical high-frequency public transport route network based on the radial routes. If indeed the city centre were to cease to be the magnet it has always been, it has massive implications for public transport's role in Greater Nottingham. Now, so far, the government has, I believe, done an admirable job for us, very admirable, and has underwritten the bus network. It's been making good the deficit between our operating costs that we've incurred to maximise service output to facilitate social distancing, but nevertheless, the very low revenues we've been receiving due to very low ridership levels, as I've already explained. So what happens next? If you haven't read the document, I'm sure you'll be familiar with the launch of Bus Back Better, the first national bus strategy. It talks at great length about turn up and go high frequency bus services operating across the breadth of the day in the week. Well, we've been doing that in Nottingham for a long time. It talks about the importance of bus priority. Well, we already have 26 kilometres of bus lane. We already have automated junctions where buses activate the traffic signals to get priority. We've been doing that increasingly over the last decade. It talks about the need to make the bus offer easy to understand. Simple fares, we've had flat fares for 20 years. Interoperator ticket availability, we've had that for 10 years too. So there's no magic wand in the toolkit, and we weren't expecting one. Perhaps the biggest change for us is going to be the emphasis on reducing emissions and moving to a zero emission base. We've already invested in 120 biogas powered double deck buses, giving us the largest fleet of biogas powered buses in the world. And we're now looking at the options to go electric. You'll probably be familiar with the Zebra scheme that's currently out. And in partnership with the City Council, we will be putting together a bid for a zero emission fleet of single deck buses. So partnership working will be the way forward. To be honest, it's been the way of working in Nottingham for the best part of 20 years now. So really, we will have to keep doing what we already do, but even better. And that is going to be a challenge based on the things I've said. And the fact that in an environment post 19th of July, people will still be nervous about using public transport and nervous about the implications of not social distancing. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, David. I mean, interesting already, kind of raising questions about, on the one hand, the service that is on offer, but actually being very mindful about the reasons to travel. In a sense, we have to think about the reason to travel as well as the mode by which they travel, which then takes us beyond transport, which I'm sure we'll get into in the conversation. Verna, let's turn to you and get a perspective from Derby. Verna.
Thank you, Andrew, and hello, everybody, and thank you for asking me to join this Midlands debate today. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think there's a lot of movement in the transport challenge charts, if you will. We still have congestion, perhaps like the Rolling Stones, unfashionable, but with a dogged following and unwilling to retire. Decarbonisation, the Kajagoogoo, who changed its frontman, this time Greta rather than Limahl, but has clearly gone straight in at number one. And then newcomers, new entries like demand responsive transport, obviously featuring Maz, who which turns out to be the artist formerly known as Community Dial-a-Bus, but this time with an urban remix. So, so joking aside, I think COVID has given us a wobble. And yes, we don't have that certainty on people's travel habits, but a couple of things for me are important from the outset. The first one is to say the transport is good. We are humans, we are sociable, and that contact benefits our physical and mental health. And two, that we are creatures of habit. So just like returning to the office, if we don't move the desks, we're going to sit in the same seat, i.e. we're going to get back in our cars. Now, I'm very confident that we're facing the same issues of many of you, but what was going through my head this morning were a few things. Firstly, mobility. So it feels like a word that's had a bit of a makeover, but certainly something we're grappling with in Derby, and not least because I'm not convinced that we need another local transport plan. We met unifying goals under COVID through collaboration, yes, and adrenaline, but aren't we better to integrate our plans with our economic and social ambitions? And maybe mobility helps us make that transition by focusing on moving people and goods rather than vehicles. But actually this time I sense, and I don't know if you do, Andrew, it means more than that. This is mobility as a right. This is that anyone can go anywhere at any time. And I think that desire is really provoked by the promise of technology. So we're working in Derby with the university, the college and commercial partners to set up a mobility as a service trial, so that we can look at meeting the challenge of moving students at the new academic year. We're doing that through our future transport zone funding that we secured jointly with Nottingham. And at the same time, we're then looking at the bigger piece, how do we extend that Maz across the wider geography? Because we need access to the development at our boundaries. We're a compact city. So how do we make those jobs accessible to the people who live in our deprived inner city wards? We need connectivity to our enterprise zones, to East Midlands Airport, the Freeport sites, and I'll boldly say to HS2 at Toton, because we're still making inefficient trips due to those physical barriers. So how do we ensure that mobility is not just emperor's new clothes, but actually provides the freedom and equity we hope for, and that the corporate dream makers will sell to us? The big second one, as David said, is decarbonisation. And in Derby, we've got a really proud industrial heritage based on trains, planes and automobiles. But that success was founded on hydrocarbons. We've committed to 2030 as a target for net carbon zero in the city. And there's a lot of difficult, challenging questions that this asks, not just from, should we change the A38 junction scheme, but, what should we do about drive-ins? So, and as David said, there should be a massive opportunity here for public transport. It's been decimated by the pandemic. And although services are bouncing back, they're still not attracting new customers. The bus strategy is very welcome, and we need provision of public transport to be more than just a commercial decision. But as David's, will it have the teeth to create the London-style transport system that's purported to be the excellence that we're striving for? I think Midlands Connect have certainly been doing some fantastic work to help us navigate around this area. We're a very typical city. About a third of our emissions come from transport. But our carbon budget tells us we've got 7 years. We need to be radical, and we need to do it at pace. And in Derby, we want to use those engineering and manufacturing skills we have to grow as a centre for future fuel technology, to build the products and services that will support the deployment of new fuels in our homes and businesses. We've kicked off a study by Arup to look at the potential for hydrogen in Derby and the region. And I'm really pleased to say that those findings are exciting, but it's that old chestnut. How do we break supply and demand? And could transport be the catalyst for change? So we're working with Derbyshire because we know that what we want is a fleet of hydrogen buses and some refueling sites. But this isn't transport. This is about us influencing new energy markets. The last biggie for me is the competition for space and place. So at a really granular level, how are we going to get our communities involved in shaping where they live? And what about the segregation of road space? Are we really ready to give up car space for bus lanes, for cycle paths, for footpaths? We've been very lucky in Derby that some of our temporary active travel schemes have stayed. But just like the perennial issue of school parking, that's required really sensitive handling. And on a city scale, if we want people to come back to our city centres, not just to shop, but to live, we need greener spaces, we need greater permeability. In Derby, we've got a traditional inner ring road, a concrete collar, if you like. So now we want green boulevards, we want flowing street spaces that put the walker first. So managing that competition for space in our city and district centres requires exceptional relationship skills to deal with the conflict and find consensus. And I could be here all day with lots of other things, the importance of spatial planning, the importance of long-term funding, revenue funding, the skill shortages we're facing, like traffic signals, how we use the big data that we're generating, and the fact that the East Midlands and Midlands Connect demonstrates this, and Transport for the East Midlands demonstrates this. We can speak with one voice. So if I get back to my musical theme, for me, the challenge is, how do we write a score for our transport system that uses the full breadth of the instruments playing in harmony so that we create a symphony that makes people move whenever they hear it?
Verna, thank you very much indeed. As tempting as it is for me to carry on your theme, I try to stick in my lane and know my limitations. So well done on that, but I'm not going to try and do anything more. But again, fantastically interesting kind of perspectives. Again, the economic geography in relation to the transport demands, but also, the stresses that you put on the net zero, the decarb agenda, big issues which ripple through our places in lots of different ways. Let's get a view and a perspective from Leicester. Andrew, what's going on in Leicester?
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. Very timely today for us, because today we launch our new local transport plan. So unlike Verna, who's obviously pointed out that Derby aren't going down that route, we most clearly are. And I'd like to think, again, using Verna's sort of reference to charts, I think our LTP will go in at number 1 in today's LTP charts. It's nothing like being ambitious, is there? So yeah, good timing, and I will post on chat our link to our new local transport plan, and also I'll say a little bit more about workplace parking levy in a little while as well. So yeah, we do believe in long-term planning, and I think, for the reasons that Verna's alluded to, you've got to look in the long run. I think you've got to look beyond the immediate, and I think local transport plans do help us to do that. Our challenges, I think, there are some commonalities clearly between what Verna and David have both said. We are a city that's growing rapidly. We are underbounded, we're constrained, and so a lot of the growth is taking place on the outskirts of the city, and we work very closely with our colleagues at Leicestershire County Council and the district councils to manage the interrelationship, and obviously that has an absolutely key feed into transport and transport planning. Similarly, we've got a lot of central urban regeneration going on, and one of the things that we're pulling out of our local transport plan is the sort of concept of a 10 or 15 minute city and neighborhoods, and traveling within those neighborhoods. I'm sure you'll be very familiar with those concepts. Climate emergency is clearly, as has been said, a top priority for us. We've had some good discussions most recently with Midlands Connect colleagues around decarbonisation. And I think one of the things that came through strongly for me is the sort of realistic target setting, and making sure that we are. It's not a race for who can get there quickest. It's actually about setting out realistic, sensible, achievable targets, but ambitious at the same time. Health and healthy living, I think, is a key one for us. Heart disease, respiratory disease is a particular issue in Leicester. And I think, the work that we've done around active travel, I know many others have as well, feeds into that, and that resonates very strongly. So we work closely with our health colleagues, and we have done in the preparation of our transport plan. Air quality, I don't think has been mentioned particularly, but we're in a good place in Leicester. We're below EU limits now, and clearly there's a big feed in there from COVID-19 and the impacts of traffic reduction. But our path was heading in that direction anyway, and I think it's just accelerated that trend for us. But again, we know we've got some more targets coming down the line. We've got PM 2.5. We're going to have to start thinking about more closely. WHO targets are going to be set for PM 2.5. And I think obviously COVID-19 and the challenges that's presented, David's talked about busing and the drop in patronage. And I think for Leicester, like a number of cities, perhaps less so Nottingham, patronage had been declining anyway over a period of time. And, we were looking to reverse that trend. COVID coming along has obviously put a major spanner in that works, but we're seeing some positive signs, and I think I'm hopeful, and I believe that busing will come back, and the investments that we're going to be making, I'll say a little bit more about in a minute, will help that recovery. I think things like park and ride are really struggling, and will struggle for some time now, because they are so dependent on that sort of commuter market and office workers in particular. So what's our plan? What are we saying in our local transport plan? There are three key areas of work that we're focusing on. Firstly, connected hubs and corridors, as we're calling it. There's a particular focus around commuting, use of radial routes, investment in our transport hubs. In terms of rail, we work really closely with colleagues across the Midlands, including Midlands Connect and the other councils in the East and West. A lot of focus around east-west transport movements, schemes coming forward, linking Coventry, Leicester and Nottingham, improved services between Leicester and Birmingham, to name a few. And we think those are deliverable in the relatively short term, which obviously some of our larger infrastructure rail schemes are going to take a little bit longer to come through. We are looking at creating what we call green lines, which is a express high quality electric bus service on main radial routes. We've chosen not to go down the tram route. We've had a close look at that. We think a high quality bus is good for Leicester, more flexible, less cost to set up and run. We see some of the challenges that other cities with trams are having at the moment. And if you're familiar with cities like Belfast and Amiens in France, you'll know of their high quality networks, and that's what we're really looking to in Leicester. Lots of work going on at the moment, and we'll be continuing around bus priority and commuter cycleway investment, particularly through our Transforming Cities Fund. So we're planning more of the same there. And we are investing heavily in transport hubs and improving integration in our transport hubs. So we secured getting building fund for our St Margaret's bus station. Works are underway there. And one of our big proposals in our transport plan is to completely reconfigure the railway station in Leicester, and that again has strong connections into the work that Midlands Connect and others are working on at the moment. We continue to invest in our city centre. We have an ongoing Connecting Leicester programme, transforming streets into safe cycling and walking spaces and creating new public spaces throughout the city centre. I think it's right. I think we are top of the charts in terms of pedestrian priority zones with cycling allowed. I think we have the largest area of any city in the country, I'm pleased to say, and we're building on that. And also just to say that we are really looking to the future of electrification of transport in the city. We've just put into action 11 electric buses on our park and ride routes. We've got a couple more coming for our hospital hopper. We've got 500 electric bikes that have just literally launched in the last month or so throughout the city centre, proving incredibly popular already, we're pleased to say. And we've got a zebra bid in fast track, so we're hunting zebras at the moment, but I can't tell you about the outcome of that. Second theme is around healthy connected neighbourhoods. So this is really, as I say, focusing in on neighbourhoods, how they connect into the main radial routes and the services that we are proposing on those, looking at how we can make streets safer. We've got a new, relatively new street design guide. We had help from Brian Deegan and Phil Jones, I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with. Active travel, behaviour change, cycling and walking activity, a lot of investment going in through transforming cities and our own Connecting Leicester programmes. And of course, we, I think, became very well known for our pop-up work. I think we were one of the first cities to have a transport recovery plan in place for COVID reaction works. We created 10 miles of pop-ups in 10 weeks, which I think must be some sort of record, which maybe puts us top of the charts, I don't know. And we've invested very heavily in widening pavements and creating better environments in our district shopping centres. And finally, the third area of work is around managing demand for car use. Now, you might say the two areas I've just talked about absolutely do that. Well, of course they do. But we are looking at the introduction of a workplace parking levy also. We've been working very closely with colleagues in Nottingham, who have the only one in the Northern Hemisphere. So they're good people to talk to. They've been very helpful. So we are consulting our initial thoughts on that as part of our local transport plan. So it's embedded. We see that as really important in terms of not only managing demand for car use, but also investing very substantially over a prolonged period of time in sustainable transport. There are other aspects related to managing car demand, such as smart signals, use of technology, ticketing, and various other measures. So I just wanted to finish on two really important things, I think. And I come back to where I started, which was the importance of planning, future planning, and integrating that with land use planning. So I do believe that local transport plans are important. Talking to DFT colleagues recently, I think they increasingly believe it's important. Yeah. It was mentioned in the National Bus Strategy, and I think it will be mentioned in the decarbonisation plan. And I think, you know, it helps us maybe to move away from competitive bidding and lurching from bid to bid, and thinking about potentially creating an environment where we've got a platform for my second point, really, which is around sustained funding going forward. I do believe that we need, you know, a more stable environment for funding the infrastructure and the many good things that we do. That's partly why we're going down the WPL route. We think it can give us that. But I also believe that government needs to play its role, look at block allocations over 5 years again, linked to LTPs, but not like it was before. I think they need to be more strategic, more high level, and allocations based on that rather than war and peace and things that gather dust on our shelves. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Andrew. Again, lots to pick up. Very encouraging that you're going down the WPL route. We're fans of that at the Centre for Cities, encourage more places to look seriously into introducing those. Bridget, you've heard a lot. Bring it all together for us and give us a kind of slightly broader and wider view.
Thanks very much, Andrew, and it's great to be here and participate in this. The East Midlands is a very important and perhaps a rather different region than many, in the sense that there's no sort of city, one city at the centre of it, but rather a variety. And as a recent incomer to the region, I've become increasingly fascinated. I'm now living on the borders of Nottinghamshire and Lincolnshire, so it's personal. But my job today is to just give you a helicopter view of what I've heard. And I think, and from the perspective of the National Infrastructure Commission, which after all has the job of taking that national view and taking a long-term view, a 30-year view of what our infrastructure needs are. And for me, there are three themes that I'd like to sort of pick out of what everybody has said today, which has been really interesting and powerful and inspiring stuff from you all. And my three themes are the theme of integration, one of innovation, and the third of independence. And I'll try and explore each of those. The integration theme came through, I think, from all of you, in the sense of thinking about how your communities operated, the quality of life, and how transport planning related back to economic, social regeneration programs as well, and the importance of being able to link all those three together. And that's something that we've talked about a lot in the work that we've done on cities at the NIC. Theme that came out of our first infrastructure assessment, which was published in 2018, was the importance of getting that integration to work. And that integration, of course, only works at a local level. Whitehall can't do it. Every time they try, they fail. And we worked with a number of cities over the last couple of years, and we're now doing a study of towns at the request of the Treasury, looking at infrastructure needs of towns. And the borderline between a city and a town can be a bit blurry, but one of the things that is coming up in that is very much about stable funding, being able to integrate. Those sorts of themes are the themes that are emerging just as they emerged for cities in the work that we did then. And we're very keen to help give cities and towns the confidence to produce the sorts of plans that they need and to do the planning that is required. I'm sort of well known for saying that plans don't always work. Planning is really important, but don't get too hung up on an individual plan, because the world evolves and the world changes as you go through. And that brings me to the second theme, which is the theme of innovation, which has also been mentioned by a number of you. The need to innovate in how you're using the data that you've got, but also innovate in the way that you're thinking about, may I say, mobility as a service, and workplace parking levies. It's only one after all, so that's still quite a lot of innovation to go at there. And so I'm very encouraged to hear the way that people are talking about that innovation in using the infrastructure that we've got already. I think it's very easy always to think about we must build something new and something different, and not necessarily make the best use of what we've got. And the technology is obviously crucial to being able to make the best use of what we've got, whether that's intelligent signals, whether it's redesign of signage and better ways of relating signage to how people are moving about, and all of those sorts of aspects. At the NIC, again, we did a study on which came out, which started as how do we make better use of infrastructure, ended up as a report called Data for the Public Good. Out of that has come Daphne. I can't remember, the D is definitely data, and the N is national infrastructure, NI is national infrastructure. I can't remember what the rest of it stands for. Anyway, it's got its launch conference next week, and they've been working hard to set up centres to be able to do the research and get the innovation going in that area. So I hope that you will all be able to participate in that continuing work. It's being it comes under the rubric of the UK Centre for Research and the UK Collaboratorium for Research into Infrastructure and Cities, the UCRIC, which I'm on the advisory board of, and I think are doing some really interesting work in this kind of area. So maintaining that pressure for innovation, working out whether you want a bus or a tram. Very pleased to see that you don't necessarily just go down the tram route, because they can be, they can be very effective in particular places if you can get the right level of patronage. But of course, once you've got it, you've lost the flexibility that a bus has got. So there are definitely pros and cons there. And the other area where innovation, I think, needs to be perhaps one thing nobody mentioned was freight. So one of the things that, again, we did is we've done a study on freight. I was one of the lead commissioners on that. One of the things that I found was really interesting is where you put depots, planning for depots. We've got all of this into the Freeport, which of course East Midlands is crucial in. How you think about the bigger picture, the intercity as well as the intra-city, and making sure that works effectively. How we're going to manage freight, whether what the fuels, decarbonised fuels are for lorries is obviously a big question, whether hydrogen will work for that, still a bit of an open question. East Midlands is a real centre after all of the freight industry, so I would encourage you all to take that leadership role and to press it further forward. So that's a kind of a further pressure on the innovation front. And then finally, independence. So this again comes back to the devolution point, the ability of each town and city to bring together its own plans, but be able to operate within that national framework. And that is what at the Infrastructure Commission we are trying to do. And I just want to finish with a couple of words about the rail study that we did, published last autumn, Rail Needs for the Midlands and the North, where we had two main conclusions really. One, that the east-west links were the ones that really required the most rapid investment. North-south was actually better served. So the HS2 links into the East Midlands should be an absolute priority. Got into a certain amount of trouble for saying maybe you should think about whether centres into Nottingham and Derby were a better option, or possibly a better option. Maria, however, has banged me over the head on that one and insisted that for Nottingham and Derby, Towton is the answer and where you want to go. And if I am a proponent of devolution and that's your decision, that is certainly one that I have moved to support, while at the same time saying that the north-south part of this still needs to actually be carefully thought about for making sure that we do the right links into Sheffield and into Leeds. And that, in our view, hadn't been thought about carefully or not, but that's not cancelling the eastern leg, just to be clear. So that's just a note to finish on. Obviously, we're now starting work on the second National Infrastructure Assessment, and that will include more work around freight, roads and rail systems. Thank you.
Bridget, thank you very much indeed. Daphne is the Data and Analytics Facility for National Infrastructure.
Thank you for that.
So I've been told.
I can never. You get the acronym in your head, and then you can never remember what it stands for. Yeah,
what it all stands for. No, quite right. So we've had a great set of presentations. We have quite a good set of questions. Many of you asked me to ask them. There were one or two that prepared to ask them themselves. But I wanted to start off. We've had a couple of questions in this sort of theme. Maybe David, I can come to you first off, and then maybe get Andrew to reflect on this. You know, in a sense, 66% patronage currently. What does that mean for levels of future service? And picking up on Bridget's point, future investment. In a sense, is that where you think it's going to settle? And then how do you run comprehensive services at a lowered patronage rate? And what does that mean then for future rounds of investment, in terms of the innovation that Bridget and indeed others were touching on? David, just give me some thoughts on that, the kind of operational challenges, I suppose, and get Andrew to say something on that.
It's a very good point. I certainly hope 62/3, 66% isn't where we're going to be going forward. Nottingham's got a huge student population, 62,000 university students, that we all hope will be back in Nottingham at the back end of September, and we'll be back travelling on the buses as they used to be. So I'm guessing by the end of this year we'll be topping over 80%. But the general view amongst the transport forecasters is that it may take 2 years to get back to pre-COVID levels of bus patronage. In the short term, that means we either contract services, which for the long-term agenda would be the wrong thing to do, or DfT bites the bullet and continues to provide funding over that 2-year stretch. Now, Bus Back Better makes lots of promises about bus funding going forward, £3 billion over the duration of this Parliament, taking us, I guess, to Christmas 2024. But, out of that 3 billion, there's probably £1 billion set aside for 4,000 zero-emission new buses. Sounds like both Nottingham and Leicester will be trying to get its hands on some of that. Which leaves 2 billion. We have an immediate issue of what happens to the current funding. The current funding for buses expires at the end of August. We have to get from August through to next April, when the Bus Back Better document becomes live and we enter into our enhanced partnership with our local authorities, Nottingham City and Nottinghamshire County. So there is no obvious answer at the moment, but clearly we're hoping the funding will keep us going for the duration of the next 2 years. I think in all probability, by this time next year, bus operators will be expected to be standing on their own 2 feet, but we really need to be getting very close to 100% of pre-COVID levels for that to be a realistic possibility.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there is going to be a short-term contraction of the bus network, which, as we know, in the game of trying to achieve modal shift, would be the wrong thing to happen.
Yeah, no, very good. Thank you, David. Andrew, just pick up on this in a sense, and let me be slightly, challenging in the sense of, notwithstanding David's point in Nottingham, but in general, from a public transport point of view, getting back to pre-COVID levels is, that's not really anywhere near good enough, right? We need to go further than that. We want to encourage, as appropriate, more modal shift away from private cars as appropriate. And Bridget, rightly reminds us the cars are incredibly important, but it's to go beyond that. But what does that mean then for, the delivery of services and future investment when money is incredibly tight or very competitive, as we've already heard? What's your thoughts on that?
We've got to back the bus, haven't we? We've got to back the bus going forward. We've got to believe that the bus is a absolutely critical feature in modal shift. Our local transport plan does just that. It sets out a range of actions that we believe should take us forward and should bring about that sort of modal shift. We've got to invest in our own supported services, our park and ride services, electrification, other supported services, contracted services that we run. We've got to work closely in partnership with our partners. We're different from Nottingham. Obviously, our composition, as David's alluded to, is quite different. We've got 4 main operators. We work very well with them, very closely. We believe that the EPS is going to be critically important in driving forward that investment in buses. I worry, like David, about the funding. I do believe the stability requires ongoing investment from government over a period of time. That needs to be kept under review, I think. Otherwise, we will be seeing contractions in services. And I think once you take a step back, it's so much harder to come back and reverse those trends. Yeah. So stability is definitely the watchword for me.
Great, thanks, Andrew. I'll come to you in a second, Verna. But Bridget, with your kind of national infrastructure economist hat on, I mean, HMT buy in the argument that investment into services pays it back over the, over the longer term, or do they kind of treat this as expenditure, right? It's gone, it's gone. We're not really seeing much. I mean, what's your view on that, and sort of sets out the kind of challenge for us?
Yes, I think that's there's still strong elements in the Treasury that say if this was worth doing, it would have been done already. So, and if it's a social service, then it's a kind of public good, but that doesn't pay back. It's the whole point. You're paying for something which you think is valuable on other grounds, but you're not actually able to pay for it. And if they get very stuck between these two propositions, actually, I think it's changing. I think probably in Treasury, but it's certainly there's still a strong sense that, yes, I say, if it was worth doing, some private person would already have done it, and if it was worth having buses, then that's what would have happened. Yeah. And it is interesting, actually. I was just reflecting that when there was the big expansion of bus services in London under Ken Livingstone, I was the chief economic advisor at that point, and for the GLA. And what you saw was a lot of shift from other active travel, more buses. So people waited for the bus and got on the bus rather than walking to the station. And I noticed myself, I was living in London at that point, and I noticed myself, that's what I did. You look to see, especially the app would tell you there's a bus in 2 minutes. Don't want to walk and be passed by the bus, so I'll wait and get a bus. And so it isn't a mode shift then out of the car. And London obviously is very different kind of city, but I think it's really important to be aware of that risk and that possibility. And the number of people for whom the car is an element in a whole number of shit. So you get in the car to drop the kids at school, to go to work, then do the shopping, then take some child to an event after school, and so on. And the bus won't do that. So thinking of the bus as being always a substitute for the car won't work. Yeah,
no, that's very helpful. Very good perspective on that. Verna, just pick up this theme, but also, you've talked about, an ambition to drive patronage into the public transport as appropriate, again, from the private transport system. How confident are you that, that you've got what you need in order to do that?
I think it's hugely challenging, and I but very much agree with all the other participants. And I suppose for me, some of it is around what is the real cost of transport. That we don't, that the clarity between the good of the bus and the savings that makes in terms of the economics as well as the carbon, but particularly probably the carbon. And I guess I absolutely agree with Bridget around the fact that it is people who cycle and walk who tend to get the bus, and not people in the car. So there has to be a bit of, there has to be a bit of stick in some of this. There has to be those difficult, and again, for me, that really important link back to spatial planning, those difficult conversations about, do we get cars? Are we reducing the number of cars in the city centres, particularly to start with? How are we looking when we have new developments? Are we really chasing down, the bus? Okay, it tends to be schools at the front and then highway infrastructure, but are we looking with our developers to bring buses and look at that transport? And I guess one of the things that perhaps none of us has mentioned is the demand responsive. Yeah. So we've talked about electric, etc., but actually making that bus a really attractive proposition, but it's got to be convenient. It's got to allow me, I get that sense of freedom, particularly as a woman, when I step in that car. Yeah. How can I do that in terms of a bus? And I think DRT and young people is particularly an area where we're hoping that we can have some success. We're definitely looking at that as an option, and some, again, as Andrew said, that the bus priorities, the intelligence signals, all those things. Challenging though for our politicians. Challenging, comes back to that. Who owns the road? Where's that road space? Are we okay with giving up for buses? It's fascinating, and yeah, supporting buses definitely the right thing to do.
Great, thank you very much. So time is again, so we've got about 10 minutes. I want to pick up two areas. So Doug Walters. Doug, if you're on the call, you asked a question really on the demand side, the reasons to travel point that that all of our speakers were talking about. Doug, if you're there, unmute and ask your question, and I'll get quick fire responses. Doug, go away. Away you go. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, basically, there's been a lot of research prior to the pandemic that to survive, city centres and town centres really have to migrate from being retail focused to being much more of a mix of retail, but also leisure facilities, coffee shops, gyms, small parks, cinemas, that sort of thing. Now I know that cities have those, but so it's and rather. Now I asked this question in the context of David's talk,
Yes.
and I wondered whether Nottingham had embraced that, or was still a traditional, primarily retail centre, because it's almost like I have been amazed about the lack of discussion in the discussion so far about the customer and the user, why they want to go there.
Yes, exactly. So let's get that kind of question, which is the point that David started on, which is the reasons to travel. Verna, let's start with you. You know, you talked a little bit about, you know, rethinking how the Derby economy and how it plays out those spaces has evolved. So just say something about that. I may not come to all of you because I want to get another question in, which is about Devo. But Verna, away you go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know, all of the cities and other places are really struggling with this challenge as a retail fades away from our city centres. So certainly in the city, what we're looking at is how do we get it at that destination, and we're looking at the cultural heart. So for us, culture, yes, cafe culture, etc. But yeah, culture, theatre, arts. You know, how do we excite and enliven the city centre with that sort of approach?
Very good. David, you mentioned it first off. You were asking a question a little bit about Nottingham. What's your view on it? I mean, more than retail, is that a kind of now a more accepted view of the future?
Unquestionably, Nottingham has a very successful nighttime economy, which is based on the social side, and Nottingham has got to make that adjustment to the daytime economy too. But look at that map behind me. You know, that is a public transport network. It's a radial high-frequency network. That's when public transport works, serving a successful centre. Yeah. And that's what everyone on this call has to be focused on, maintaining our city and town centres as thriving areas that people want to visit. Okay, otherwise, public transport won't work.
Won't work. Very good. Okay, let's move on. We had a question from Clive. He's asked me to ask it. It says, and I'm going to come to you, Bridget, and then Andrew, is competition between our cities for funding a good thing or a bad thing? And does Midlands Connect have a role in coordinating who bids for which pot? So this is a broader question, Bridget, about how we fund our places and what we expect of them. Just give us your kind of perspective on that.
So I think that what we need, fewer funding pots, more stable and more long-term. So there will inevitably be competition, because there's only ever going to be, you know, there's some limited money, but the departments have gone so much down the road of, well, we're going to have a fund for this and a fund for that and a fund for the other, and you guys spend all your time filling in forms and trying to justify stuff and then doing the evaluations and appraising it afterwards, blah de blah. So the whole point of a more devolved system should be that there should be long-term funding with the ability of local areas to choose where they're going to put their money, to pull it together with the spatial side of things, with the with social ambitions and what people want, to come back to the customer point. So fewer and longer.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Bridget. Andrew, pick up that point, but we've also had a couple of questions about you know, you're at the city, you mentioned you're underbounded. Do you work with the county on those kind of broader hinterland issues that David was alluding to as well, about obviously people are traveling beyond the city boundaries? How does that work? You're on mute. There we go.
Someone had to do it,
yeah,
and it was me. Just to pick up the funding point, I totally agree with Bridget on that. I mean, I think, you know, the incrementalism that comes from competitive working isn't helpful. You know, we've got limited resources. Our resources are absolutely ploughed into that. You know, those that have got better resources put better bids in and benefit. I think we do need less competition. We do need more stability, more block allocations against sensibly thought out longer term plans. And I also think, I should have mentioned this earlier, devolution of decision making on workplace parking levy from the Secretary of State down to city mayors, down to the local level. It would be an absolutely fantastic step forward, and I think would be very, very effective in dealing with some of the things I've alluded to. On our working relationship with the county and how that works, transport doesn't recognise administrative boundaries, does it? And we're very clear in our local transport plan about how we need to recognise the interconnectivity between ourselves and the county council and the districts at one level, and that works very well at strategic planning and transport planning, but also to look at across a wider piece as well, and across to the the whole Midlands, to Coventry and other places, Birmingham, that we need to work closely with.
Very good. Okay. Last couple of minutes. Let's get one more very quick. Verna, I'm going to come to you first. Again, several questions. Angela, Chloe, Richard put the question in about East Midlands often getting left behind, particularly from a devolution point of view. What's your thought on that? Does that mean that the area will need to grasp the nettle on devolution to get its its position in front of the government? Your view on that?
Oh, give me a difficult question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the last one.
It was tricky. But we can speak with one voice. I think HS2 East, particularly, how we've come together, the development of Toten, the growth study, etc. I think we can and we do speak with one voice, and can make the case very strongly. Yes, I would absolutely like to see a way that we can devolve some of those powers and decision making, just as others have said, to places that are not mayoral combined authorities. I think I think we can demonstrate that it works. We've got the plans. We know what we're doing.
Okay.
Let us have it.
Very good. David, your thought on this?
Yeah, that is a very hard question. The East Midlands hasn't traditionally been that coordinated, has it? I mean, Nottingham has fought its own corner, which why we haven't had that devolution. Nottingham looked at going for elected mayor status and discarded it. So perhaps there does need to be a bit of a mindset change that Vernon has indicated is starting to happen.
Very good. And Bridget, just give us a final kind of national answer to that sort of question about devolution and East Midlands.
I think you just have to keep shouting. So, how long did it take Manchester to get to the point of doing the first city deal? It took them about 20 years. We're speeding up, and the Infrastructure Commission will, we do support that need for the integration and independence. So we will support, but we need the other, people showing that they can make it work, that they're doing it, and Midlands Connect and Midlands Engine really important in all of that.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. And I know Maria and her colleagues are front and center in making those bigger arguments about what needs to happen at the different geographies of the of the sub-region. I think those are well made, and I'm sure HMT and colleagues in government are paying attention. It's 12 o'clock. We could go on. I'm really sorry. We got through a bit. We didn't get through by anywheres enough, so I apologize that we didn't get as many questions as I would have liked, but we do need to finish. Let me thank our excellent speakers, David, Verna, Andrew and Bridget, and also thanks to Midlands Connect and Maria and her colleagues for working with us on the event. Much appreciated. Thank you all for attending, pausing and asking your questions. Apologies we didn't get through as many as I would like. You'll get a recording of the event on our website, centrefacilities.org, very shortly. Our next event is actually tomorrow at 11:30, and it's focused on levelling up. Surprise, surprise. Tomorrow we'll be hearing from politicians rather than officials. We'll have 2 Metro mayors and 1 city leader, and they'll be talking to us about what their plans for their place are, and indeed what they would want from the government in order to make good on the promises around levelling up. So if you're interested in that, get onto our website. The details are there, and I'll see some of you tomorrow, no doubt. But for now, until the next time, take care and stay safe. Bye for now.